welcome back for those of you who are with us this morning, and a brand new welcome for the new people that are joining us for event number 2, Teaching Today's Students. We have a great panel for you today. The way it's going to work out, we'll introduce the panelists and the kind of thing that we're doing here, and then each panelist will have about 5 minutes or so to speak. And we'll save the end for Q&A. Some of them will be posing questions to you, so you'll actually have to do some work as well. On our panel today, we have Debbie O'Donnell, Rochelle Datch, made sure I practiced that one, Jessica Fales, Maria de Jesus Dixon, and then Lauren Reed. They're all going to talk about different populations. But I'm going to introduce Erica Austin from the Provost office, and she will kind of get us started.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for being here from various sites. I really appreciate you giving part of your President's Day to this. It's a really important topic, quite obviously. And I'm hoping that with what you learned from our panel and from each other today, you can take this out and help disseminate it around the rest of our system, because it's really important for us to understand how our students think today, what their expectations are, where they're coming from, what kinds of situations they're navigating. And it's really different from when you went to school and when I went to school. And we really need to understand this to be able to provide them with the most successful and transformative kind of experience. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm faculty in the Monroe College of Communication. I'm also Vice Provost for Academic Affairs. And one of the things that I've been helping to facilitate over the last few years is a system-wide emphasis on student success. What can we do together to really help our students to understand them better and all that? So just a couple of things that our panel will highlight in more depth that I thought you might find kind of interesting. I joined the university in 1989.
Do you want to just talk into that guy?
Sure. Okay. So I joined the university in 1989. So I've been here almost 30 years. And when I joined the university, resident undergraduate tuition was, I had it here, $1,827 for the year. Yes, it is now $11,584. If you figure out the total cost of attendance, it's almost $28,000. Since 2008, so if you're just looking at 10 years instead of 30, because you figure, well, things are going to change in 30 years. If you just look at 2008, tuition has gone up 72% since 2008. So it's 172% of what it was in 2008. In the meantime, we have a larger student body, and twice as many of them are Pell eligible. So low income, in need of financial assistance. And the stresses that they have to navigate, as Maria's probably going to tell us about, are really pretty extreme. We have a lot of students, not only do we have a lot of students who are Pell eligible.
We still can't hear you. The mic is falling off or something.
Is that better?
Yeah, I think they're having trouble hearing.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Let me try doing that. Okay, hopefully that's better. So anyway, we have these lots of Pell eligible students, and way too many of them are not covered by the state need grant. And we have quite a number of them who have more than $7,000 in unmet need. So we have a lot of students who are working multiple jobs, trying to send money home, especially if they're first generation students, and somewhere around almost 40% of our students are first gen. So the stresses on them are really pretty incredible. At the same time, they're very resilient. They're coming in with better than average GPAs on average. You know, we have a mission as a land-grant research university, as Washington State's land-grant research university, to make sure we provide access, the transformative student experience, that we do research that we can then provide out to communities to make our communities and the state and the world better. It's a very, very broad mission. And that access and outreach, making lives better part is really, really important. And so what you're doing, both in and out of the classroom, in person and online, is absolutely vital to that mission. And to be able to help students navigate just the regular rigors of higher education in an entrepreneurial way as technology continues to evolve at lightning speed, and they have all of these other things happening in their lives. It's really important for us to understand them. So, we have an incredible panel available for you today. I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say as well. And before they get started, I just want to highlight a few things that they may or may not know have just become available to you to help our students. If you're concerned at all about how students are doing towards the beginning of the semester, we've been trying to provide easier ways to provide some kind of an early warning system so that advisors can jump in, student financial services can jump in, Cougar Health can jump in, and that sort of thing. And so the three things I want you to know about. One, I think you already know about the AWARE network. So if you're having some pretty major concerns about a student, behavioral concerns, mental health concerns, that sort of thing, you can activate the AWARE network. We also now have something that is specific for academic concerns. It's called the Early Academic Referral System, so EARS, keep your ear to the ground. And you can find both of these, AWARE and EARS, on the Provost website. If you go to the Provost website and you go down the column on the left, you'll see where it says Early Academic Referral System. And what you'll see on that page is on the left side, it shows the AWARE network and the kinds of things you might want to use the AWARE network to alert somebody to about a student. And on the right side, you'll see the Early Academic Referral System and the kinds of things that are more suited to that. If you're not sure, go ahead and activate either one, and we'll figure out what the next step needs to be. And with either of these, we will try to get back to you with some kind of, not necessarily a result, but at least so that you know that some kind of action is being taken. So that's one thing, early academic referrals. Another thing that we're just standing up in the next week or so, and so if you'd like to be part of the pilot group, we invite you to join. Just email me, eaustin@wsu.edu. This is called progress reports, and you're probably familiar with the messages that come out from athletics a couple of times a semester asking how athletes are doing in your courses. They give you a roster and you just indicate whether they're doing okay. This is going to be a parallel system for students we think need a little bit of extra attention based on a predictive analytics advising system that we're using. So if you use that, if you receive something, if you want to participate, you will receive a message. It will have the students on the roster who maybe need a little extra attention and are not athletes. And you can just click on the ones you think need some follow-up, and you can let us know what kind of follow-up you think is needed. So that's two things. And the third thing I wanted you to know about is called Study Buddies. This is something that's available on a mobile app for students. It's called Navigate Student. And for them, if they download the app and then they click on their class schedule, your class will come up and they can say, hey, I would really like to have somebody to study with. I'd like to get a study group going in my class. And they put out kind of this alert that they're looking for a study buddy. And if somebody else from the class does the same thing, they'll be able to link up. And so I encourage you as faculty to let students know. And there's information, again, on the Provost website. If you have questions about it, please email me. And then one other really super quick thing is that when you submit midterm grades this semester for the first time, you'll have the ability to submit a Z grade, which is basically an F for non-attendance. And advisors have said that they would really like to know if there are students who are not attending because they don't necessarily hear about this, and they will be really happy to jump in and try to help. So with those little bits of news, I would now like to turn it over to our panel, who might be able to help you avoid needing to use any of these systems in the first place. Yeah, let's see if I can get it undone. All right.
We're going to start over in Spokane with Debbie. Debbie, are you with us?
I am with you. Yes. So can you see us in Spokane or just hear us?
We can see you.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. So I'm Debbie O'Donnell, Director of Student Services at Academic Outreach and Innovation. I'm also an adult learner myself, so I went back to school about 6-7 years ago to get my master's degree online in adult education from Kansas State University. So I'm speaking from a couple different perspectives here. So adult learners, we'll start off with, who are they? So when we're talking about adult learners, we're generally talking about those students who are what we think of as non-traditional, 25 years or older. They tend to be financially independent, certainly not financially solvent all the time, but they're responsible for themselves. They have multiple adult priorities and competing priorities and responsibilities. They're often caregivers, parents, workers. They just have lots of different roles that they're engaged in, and really, student isn't their primary role. So we'll go to our next slide. So there we are. Student, not their primary role. They really are thinking of themselves differently. They're students, certainly, but they're in a different space in their lives, whereas when we think of our traditional students who are more the 18 to 24-year-olds, they're the emerging adults. They're really becoming who they will be, and their primary focus generally is being a student, although we know in today's environment so many of the traditional students, like, what does that really mean anymore? They too are facing lots of different challenges. Not all of them, but many of them. But really, we know that adult learners really are in that category where they just have lots of things going on in their life. It's hard to define who they are. It's a diverse group of people with a very wide range of skills and knowledge and backgrounds. They're bringing a wealth of knowledge and information to them as learners to kind of contribute to the learning environment. They're generally more intrinsically motivated than younger students. They have a sense of who they are and why they're in your classroom to learn. Some of them do face some issues with self-efficacy and whatnot, but they've had a chance to really kind of live their life and understand the value of education, and they're really at a place where they want to be learning, and it's not something that if they get an A in your class, they're going to get $20 from their parents. That's not how it works anymore. They really value education. They understand what it means to become an educated citizen, and the value of individual courses, and certainly the value of an overall education. They really value that, and they again really want to be in your course space. And as I mentioned earlier, they may have had some barriers in their past, some obstacles to learning, or they may have been away for so long that they're unsure of their ability to learn, so they may be in your class and have some self-efficacy issues that need to be sort of dealt with. Next slide. Okay, so what does this really mean for educators, and how can we take what we know about adult learners and provide a learning experience for them that is going to be meaningful? So first of all, really the idea of keeping content, keeping lessons relevant. What we hear from students time and time again is that they don't have time for busy work. They really want to be able to cut through the clutter. They want to understand very clearly what is my investment in this course, and what am I going to get out of this course? What are those objectives? They also want to know really what can they gain from the class, and what's that balance? What are you adding, and what can they add to make it as relevant for them as possible? I think another interesting lesson, or another way to engage adult learners, is to really understand who they are and benefit from their backgrounds. They're bringing a wealth of information, and of course, the instructors are the content experts, but students are bringing a unique perspective, and they may be coming from different cultural backgrounds, just have a different worldview potentially that can really add value to that content. And really listening to them and hearing them, and when appropriate, incorporating some of those life lessons into your courses could be really valuable. Okay, next slide, please. So, adult students really want to be able to learn and explore in ways that are meaningful for them, because as we've identified, they really are, or they tend to be, self-directed learners, and they want some freedom and ability to explore deeper content, especially that seems the most relevant to them, and that they just want to be able to dive deeper into. And that also kind of talks about the motivation issue. When possible, when working with adult students, give them some flexibility around assignments. Let them choose if there's that ability, and there isn't always that ability, I understand, but let them choose what it is that they really want to be delving into. That's really going to help with their motivation to learn, even though they are self-motivated and are intrinsically motivated. They really want to be treated as an adult and really have more, just a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah. I kind of like wearing one because then I get to feel like, 90s pop star. So, hi, my name is Lauren. Can everybody hear me out there at the other campuses? I got thumbs up. Okay, thanks. All right, so my name is Lauren Reed. I'm here from the Intensive American Language Center. We're just across the street here at Krugel, a building I'm going to assume most of you haven't been in before. We're all down there by ourselves. So today I'm here to talk to you about international students. So my wonderful academic director made this slideshow for me. So she wanted to first start off and tell you about the kind of services that we provide. So our mission is to provide English language training for matriculation into degree programs and support the internationalization of the WSU system. So that means that there's some students in our program that are just studying academic English, meaning they're not quite ready for general university courses. And then we also have pathway students who they have like one foot in the door with us, where we're still working with them, but they're starting to take their Gen Ed courses or starting their grad studies. We are a top 5 academic English and pathway program. In the U.S., we were one of the first programs to get our CEA accreditation, which is the Commission for English Language Program Accreditation. That organization was started in 1999, was legitimized by the U.S. government in 2003, and it's now a requirement for all English language programs pushing into the university system as of 2013. So we were definitely ahead of the game there. And what we do, our teachers, our staff, we have we make our own curriculum, our accredited curriculum, and we advise students. While a lot of programs have advising, ours ends up being academic focused, but also looking at the other things, the other needs that the students might be having. maybe they don't realize that attendance kind of matters. They've come from cultures where they just need to pass a midterm and pass a final, and then that's enough. And so they don't really realize that that face time with their teachers is so important, right? It's so important in Western cultures. We have ITA services, so if you have any international teaching assistants in your programs, we do the testing to kind of let the department know what level we think that they're at and how much kind of, weight they can have in their position, right? If they can have a class on their own or if they should probably just be assisting in a lab setting. Language support, which, that kind of sounds like, of course that's what we're doing, but we provide support outside of the classroom and in the classroom. Like I said, those pathway students, if they are, if they have that pathway class in the morning, that UNIV course on speaking and listening or reading and writing, we may actually talk to them about the work that they're doing in their other courses to kind of support them and make sure that they're fully understanding what's required of them in those other classes. Our teachers do research and publish and go to conferences. We also do customized programs for international students. We have like exchange programs that come in the summer with Japanese students who come for short-term programs. And then, of course, we have the Learning Resource Center, which is me as the Learning Resource Coordinator. This is my baby. This is this room where we offer tutoring. It started off as a room with computers and an undergrad with a clipboard ready to tutor in English, but it has grown because the needs of our students are much more than that. We now have tutoring in computer science, because if you think about it, that's 2 languages at once, right? You're learning about the language of computer science in addition to being in a class that is in a second or third language for you. We also have tutoring for our electrical engineering students. They have to use programs like MATLAB. If anybody in here is EE, it's not easy, even if you do speak English. So we try to support them in these other things that become a little more difficult when compounded with the language component. I already mentioned accreditation. So here are some questions to consider. I guess when we break out and we start talking about these things at our tables or whatever it is we're doing, I want to consider, why is linguistic diversity important at the college level? I think that we can all kind of think of some really valuable reasons why it's nice to have a diverse student population in our classrooms. I think that's why we're the individuals that are in this room, because we're so interested in this. Who are linguistically diverse students? They may not always be international students. They may not even always come through our program, right? They may be wonderful students who've grown up in the U.S. in a bilingual home, and even though they've gone to a high school in California or something like that, they may still have different needs than we're not quite considering. And what challenges do linguistically diverse students experience in college? And then for me, this is focused on linguistics, but I'm also thinking about culturally diverse students. If you've ever lived in another country or been to another country, even if you spoke that language, there tends to be this kind of background noise, right? This thing that you can't really put aside that's always going on while you're trying to function in the language that you're using to get around. So I'm going to, there's a gentleman over here, and he's got this wonderful bright blue baseball cap on. I know nothing about sports, but I'm assuming that that's a sports team or something. In Cyrillic, that looks like a letter. And it also looks like a trident, which is the the national symbol of pride for Ukrainians. But that trident's upside down, which would mean that Ukraine's at war, okay? So this is happening in the background of my head. I'm not saying it's distracting, but it's this other element that's going on while I'm also trying to focus on presenting, and I'm also trying to use this thing, and I'm doing these things. If this is going on all the time in the background of your students' minds, they may be especially nervous to give presentations, or they may be more concerned or more embarrassed if they make mistakes, because the one thing becomes a bigger thing and it snowballs into pressure, this background noise and this pressure. So what strategies can colleges apply to better support the needs of linguistically diverse students in the classroom and beyond? I think that a lot of the people in this room have already considered these things, but then maybe some teachers are nervous about mentioning tutoring to students, like, hey, did you know that there's tutoring at the center in the Cub or something like that, or sending them to me. Maybe you're worried about embarrassing them or making them feel nervous about the quality of their work. But my advice, even though I'm not really supposed to be answering these questions, is to step in before it's too late, to kind of normalize tutoring. A lot of our students come from cultures where tutoring is seen as something that you need if you're not good enough, right? Whereas here, there's no penalty for going to get tutoring. Tutoring's free, and it's this wonderful thing that we have on campus for all of these subjects. But maybe they just don't understand, or they're nervous, or they're afraid that you will find out and you will judge them. Or maybe they even have this cultural aspect where they're afraid if they get tutoring, it says something about you as a teacher, and they don't want you to think that you're not doing a good job. There's so many different elements depending on where your students have come from and what they think is normal, polite, or acceptable. Some other challenges that international students may face and strategies to help them. International students are going to, of course, have issues with reading and understanding complex academic discourse. Depending on your field, they may have a lot of terminology with Latin roots, things that maybe we've become accustomed to because English is this weird language that has borrowed from so many other languages, but they may not have had that kind of background. And so they're looking up a lot more words as they're reading homework. They're going to have to Google or use some sort of translating app for a lot more vocabulary, which can damage their confidence, right? They're here because they have the linguistic ability to succeed, but because it's taking them a little more time, they might feel less confident in your course. Writing in common academic genres and citing sources. Lots of students come from countries where citing sources is actually not the norm. And so they come here and they're not trying to plagiarize or cheat. They actually think that it devalues their work to have a lot of other sources in there because they want to prove that they have the knowledge. But they need to learn, and it has to be repeated, and they have to be told again and again that, in fact, citing sources means that you are well-read and that you do understand your subject matter and that you are more prepared, right, to talk on that subject. Limited class participation, again, that factor of embarrassment or fear of not saying something correctly, or to just ask, hey, can you repeat that? Even if it's not a linguistic reason that they need you to repeat it, they don't want it to be perceived as their inability to understand. And then references to slangs and idioms. This is something that you're probably like, oh, I don't do that. I don't use slang in my classroom. But I have sat in other teachers' classrooms where they use phrases like, oh, rule of thumb is that you do this. And they don't realize like how much that has just set back a student who, okay, rule, thumb, I know these words, but and then you're 3 sentences ahead and they've lost you, right? And then integration into diverse sociocultural environments and co-curricular programming. At the end of the day, like I said, if they're exhausted from that background noise and that pressure and that stress, they probably want to retreat back to friends from their own culture or their own language so that they don't have to strain to think or talk about movies or things that they enjoy. So it's really important to get your students to kind of connect to each other in the classroom or to promote joining clubs in your field, in your department, so that they do have other connections on campus when they do want to seek that student support, that study buddy kind of thing, or just so that they feel more connected to the campus, because this is all about academic success, but academic success also comes from a place of feeling like you're comfortable where you're studying, and you don't, if you're not comfortable, if you're homesick, if you're just kind of sad or you feel alone, you're likely to not want to succeed or not want to go to class or not want to stay, right? Yeah, okay, so thank you very much. I look forward to talking about this with you in a while. Thanks.
All right. Is this working? Is this close enough? All right, so I also did not make this PowerPoint. My boss did. And she's out sick with the flu. So I got this about half an hour before we started. I'm going to be referencing it a lot just because I'm not familiar with the flow. Anyway, my name is Rochelle Datch. I work over at the Access Center, which is right across the street in the Washington building, second floor. You guys can come visit. So we're going to talk a little bit today about who are Access Center students. And now, obviously, disability is not hugely new, but the way that that plays out in an academic setting often looks very different than kind of our stereotypical what is disability, which most images that come to mind when you think about disability is, you know, a guy in a manual chair who has a spinal cord injury or can't walk. And in an academic university, especially at WSU, that looks very different. So most recent census is that it's estimated that about 11% of any university campus is somebody with a disability or chronic medical condition. And the Access Center actually serves about 7% of the population between the Pullman and Global campus with about 1,400 active students, which, fun fact, is about twice as much as campuses that look similar to ours. Most campus disability service offices are only serving about 3.5% of students, so we're really ahead of the curve on that one. But like, what does that 7% look like? And 98% of the students that we serve are actually students with disabilities. So students that look able-bodied, but who actually do have disabilities or chronic medical conditions impacting their access to the university environment. So just kind of and most students these days are presenting with one or more, or two or more conditions. So there's a lot of students with comorbid conditions that are impacting them in a lot of intersectional ways. As far as subgroups, just kind of from largest to smallest, the largest population we serve is actually students with mental health conditions, which is very different than it was maybe 15 years ago, where most students that are seeking accommodations or even in the university environment are students with very visible disabilities. Second group would be chronic medical conditions. Again, these two populations combined are increasing exponentially every year as students are becoming eligible for university, but also as stigma reduces and they feel more comfortable seeking services. Next would be ADHD, learning disabilities. So as those conditions are getting diagnosed earlier in their K through 12 experience, those students are now coming in and knowing, A, that accommodations are a thing, and B, that they're vital for that student's success. We serve a lot of students with temporary conditions, so broken bones, concussions, especially on WSU's campus while it's so icy. We're getting lots and lots of students who are slipping and falling and hurting themselves, and I think word gets out a lot that those students can seek accommodations. Instead of a concussion ending a student's semester, they're working with us, they're getting the supports they need so that they can still progress academically. We serve a lot of students on the autism spectrum, again, a population of students that's getting diagnosed earlier and getting the services they need in order to come to college and knowing, again, that they need those accommodations in order to have equal access. We're serving a small number of students with traumatic brain injuries, limited mobility, so those students with visible disabilities, using wheelchairs, walkers, canes, and then students with sensory disabilities, so students who are deaf or hard of hearing, students who are blind, and low vision. So what do all of these students have in common? Like, why are they identified as Access Center students? And the truth for all of them is that they experience barriers in the educational environment. So they have less of an opportunity to be successful in their classes, or sometimes no opportunity to be successful. So those barriers might look like preventing full access to the classroom itself, or preventing full access to the information being presented in class, as well as preventing an opportunity for those students to fully convey their knowledge. So those are the two kind of common barriers that we see students coming to our office and saying, I'm here because of X. So what do these barriers look like? The obvious ones, the ones that are obviously going to come to mind first, are those physical barriers. So an inability to get to the classroom or be in the classroom. A lot of times that looks like older buildings, not being able to either get into the classroom, fit in the classroom, or find a space in the classroom that works. Or, and again we see this with our older classrooms, the furniture is just not designed for them. And so we meet a lot of those needs by putting in specialized furniture or, on rare occasions, working with the registrar's office and department to move classrooms for students to be able to have access to the course. Additional barriers would be time barriers, time-oriented barriers. So students whose processing speed is impacted or students who take longer to convey knowledge. And then learning difference barriers. So students interact with and engage with the information in a different way. The way that they take it in, the way that they process through it, the way that they retrieve it when they're asked to then convey it. And then most of these students have very strong learning style preferences, and that's either due to their disability or due to the types of supports they received in K through 12. So in K through 12, they always had their books in an auditory format, and so they are strong auditory learners because that's how they learned their whole life. And then one of the less talked about but still very real barriers that students experience, and if you ask any student with a disability what do they struggle with the most, it is those attitudinal barriers, that perception from their peers or their instructors or the environment itself that they are less than, that they're not cut out to be here. And that's something that they internalize quite a bit. It is lessening over time, and again, why we're seeing so many students seeking services and seeking those accommodations and supports, but it is still the first thing that comes to mind when you ask a student, what do you struggle with the most? So what is the goal of the Access Center? Why are we here? The obvious answer, we're here to remove those barriers. So we're here to make that student's experience as equitable as it is for their able-bodied peers. So accommodations are designed to level that playing field. The way that I like to put it, it's not on the slide, is that academics is hard. Like being in school is hard, period, for all students. And it's not our job as the Access Center to make school easy for students with disabilities. We're here to make sure that it's just as hard for them as it is for their peers. And what that means, what that requires, is a very strong partnership with faculty. We rely on faculty to let us know, what does your class look like? Where are the barriers that you see? Where can we find creative solutions so that this single student or possibly the many students in your class have an equal opportunity to be successful or to fail? That's an opportunity for them as well. So some examples, kind of the most common one I would see students coming in for are testing accommodations. They're doing all the right things, they're going to class, they're studying, they're in their study groups, they're putting in the time and work, but the grades they're getting on their exams are not reflective of the work that they put in. And that could be due to the environment. Either they're in very, very large classes where they're impacted just by being in the class and trying to concentrate and retrieve information, or in the time available to complete their exams. So those are the two kind of most common accommodations that we approve for testing environments, is extra time and a quiet space. Another one that we see is students struggling to actually access and retain information presented in class. And so some of the accommodations that we put in place there to remove those barriers would be using lecture capture software, either through Panopto, providing students with LiveScribe pens or MP3 recorders. Most recently, we've actually employed a note-taking software called Sonocent that allows students to capture the auditory component of the lecture, input it into this software, and tie it into the visual components of lecture. So whether that's PowerPoints, their handwritten notes, or notes that they're receiving from a peer note taker, and then organize and engage with that material after the fact. And then also getting students access to PowerPoints prior to class so that they have a longer time to engage with what they're going to be presented, and look up any concepts that maybe they're not familiar with or that they know they're going to struggle to engage with in that moment. We also have an assistive technology and alternative formats program. So we're converting course materials into an accessible format. So that might be in an auditory format. So getting textbooks, converting them to MP3, converting them into a text document, and then also giving them access to text-to-speech software so that they can then play those out either on their desktop or a mobile platform. And then speech-to-text software is kind of the reverse of that. So students having access to Dragon, or more commonly the built-in speech-to-text that's in all operating systems these days. You just turn it on, they can talk to their computer, it'll type for them. So they're not having to engage with that connection between brains and hands that a lot of times is very challenging for students. And then more and more recently, due to the nature of students that we're serving, flexibility in attendance and flexibility in assignment deadlines is becoming a more commonly approved, more commonly reasonable accommodation for students. So the questions that I'm hoping you guys will engage with, and I'll give a little bit of kind of context there, but I actually have to go because I have an appointment at 2 that I have to be at, so I won't be here to participate in that conversation. I'm hoping Christy can kind of field some of that. And otherwise, I'll have my email address given out to you guys. I'm happy to chat about this more after today. But the questions to really consider are what is universal design? And for me, like in its purest form, universal design is working towards my job not being necessary. So essentially what it is students being able to walk into a course that is usable and accessible to them, which is a more proactive approach to designing classes, so that more and more students have the ability to walk in and, like I said, not experience barriers, thereby removing the need for accommodations. So some of the examples of that would be choosing textbooks that are already available in a digital format, or providing students access to those PowerPoints or using Panopto, and really what the process looks like in terms of encouraging and using universal design in your class is looking at your learning objectives and finding creative ways to meet those, and giving students access to those different options.
I'm Jessica Fales in Vancouver. Can you hear us okay?
We can, and we can see you.
Oh, great, even better. Okay. So I'm an assistant professor in the psychology department. My background is in both developmental and clinical psychology. I teach our undergraduate class on psychology of motivation, and I'm also a proud millennial here to talk to you today about Generation Z. Can somebody advance the slide for me? Great, thank you. So who is Generation Z? Sometimes this is the group referred to as post-millennials, sometimes homelanders, sometimes the I generation. Defining this generation and establishing their year endpoints is still somewhat in flux, but most agree that Gen Zers were born sometime between 1995 and 2010, plus or minus 2 years, and there's an asterisk over there in the figure because that's the most controversial component. But most of the oldest members of this cohort are now entering college, and this is our largest generational cohort, so they represent nearly a third of the population in the United States, but also globally, and that makes them larger than the millennials that came before them, but also larger than our baby boomers, which we think of as being a very large group. This group is also the most ethnically and racially diverse generation, so across the United States, a little over 50% are of Gen Z identifies as non-Hispanic white. Approximately 1 in 4 are Hispanic, 14% Black, 6% Asian, and 4% bi or multiracial. And we in the Western states are at the leading edge of this growing racial and ethnic majority. So in the West, a member of Gen Z is as likely to be Hispanic as they are to be white, 40% in each group. So we have strong minority representation in Washington state. And if you're looking at these dates in their birth cohort, most of Gen Z is still enrolled in K through 12 education, but there's emerging evidence that we do have that Generation Z is on track to become the most well-educated generation. The oldest members of the cohort are enrolling in college at a significantly higher rate than millennials were when they were at a comparable age. So about 60% of Generation Z students who are college eligible are enrolling in college, compared to about 50% of millennials when they were their age, and compared to about 45% of Gen Xers when they were at the same age. Next slide, please. Let's talk quickly about their life experiences. Although not everybody who's born into a generational period shares the same experiences, they do share a common context that helps shape their worldview. And the big one that most people think of when they're thinking about Gen Z is that these are the true digital natives. So for as long as they have been sentient, computers and cell phones have been ubiquitous in their households and in their classrooms. They were truly raised with this technology. And although all generations have their own technologies, what's different for Generation Z is that the level at which the technologies have been incorporated into their everyday lives. And so pictures like the one that are on this slide were not very hard to find on the internet, and you probably see scenes like this when you go out in public. Another unique experience for this cohort is that they were primarily educated under No Child Left Behind, and that is an act that has been widely criticized for its emphasis on high-stakes standardized testing, as well as requirements for schools to achieve minimum standards rather than incentives to achieve aspirational or maxima standards. And so that's something that may affect our college or this cohort as they're entering college. And then perhaps related to the first 2 points, this generation also enjoys, I guess, or suffers from a much more sedentary lifestyle than generations prior. So schools throughout the United States have continually reduced time devoted to recess and have also reduced physical education requirements compared to what was experienced by prior generations. And then outside of the school context, youth in this generation are and continue to spend more time on their mobile devices and more time engaged in screens than they are in any other activity during their waking hours. And so that's less time that they spend in traditional activities like riding bikes and climbing trees. There's also some emerging evidence that they're less likely to participate in structured, organized sports. Next slide, please. Okay, so in addition to those kind of unique life experiences that bind them as a cohort, they also experience these same historical events that we all have. However, they experience them at a formative time of their development. So the first one, the birth of the internet and the subsequent proliferation of social media. This generation has never known a world without the internet or being able to Google something when they need to find information. They have also lived through the war on terror, so many of them were not really old enough to fully appreciate the significance of an event like 9/11 as it was occurring, and many of them in this generation were not even born when 9/11 happened, but they've come of age in a post-9/11 world, and that includes things like the U.S. military's involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. It includes greater news media coverage of terrorism, both in the United States and worldwide, and it includes greater political polarization. And then finally, we're also living in an era of highly visible social justice movements like Black Lives Matter, marriage equality, the March for Our Lives, and currently things like the Me Too movement. And so this is a group as a cohort, and these are highly visible movements to them. This is a group that is highly aware of social justice issues, and all of these contextual events have the power to shape their worldviews. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Okay. So the question is how to engage them. And just first, as a caveat, researchers are just beginning to, first of all, they can't even really agree on a name for this generational cohort and when they were actually born. So they're really just beginning to understand the nature and their characteristics. There has been considerable marketing data on their preferences, but there's been far less information on their learning or performance outcomes. And I do think it's important to just share what some of their preferences are, because we can use that information to attract students, we can use that information to engage students and to retain them, but whether those meeting their preferences will actually lead to gains in their learning or performance outcomes is something that remains to be seen. So just what do they prefer? If you click ahead, thank you. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Gen Z does have a preference for the use of mobile technologies. They're very tied to their mobile technologies. And here, one of the unique things that this means is that they're more likely to use smartphones, then tablets, then laptops, and way down at the bottom, more likely to use desktop computers. And so that's a difference between adult learners or older millennials and this particular cohort of youth. Even though they prefer to use mobile technologies, there isn't really a strong sense yet that they require, this is something that they require to use in an educational context in the classroom, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to use their mobile technology in the classroom, although it does sound like they do enjoy online interactive classroom kinds of games like Kahoot or Socratic. But it does mean that an important point is that students are using these technologies to do things like their assignments at home and to do their reading. And so having reading and assignments that are mobile friendly can be something that is valuable. Compared to other generations, they don't have a strong preference for independent learning, and they don't have a strong preference for group learning. They prefer a little bit of both. And so they seem to have a preference for blended learning opportunities, so engaging at various levels with various resources, digital, print, peers, teachers. They like working independently, so this is a cohort that is thought to be self-reliant. They like to be able to Google and look things up themselves, but they also, perhaps because they spend so much time online, they crave real-world social connections and appreciate the opportunity to work in small groups as well. So doing things like think, pair, share activities, which we can talk about later on in the discussion if you're unfamiliar what they are, but those might be meaningful activities for Generation Z. But they like interaction with multiple resources, both independently and collaboratively. Perhaps there's been some suggestion that due to their earlier and fast-paced media exposure, Generation Z prefers complex visual content, so things like dynamic videos. So visual approaches to teaching could be used as a complement to what you're already doing in the classroom. So you might ask yourself, could students be asked to make a video or find a video online that is something that demonstrates either poorly or well something that you're trying to communicate, and then have them either create that video or bring it in for a viewing and then critique it with themselves and with their peers. There's also this sense that they enjoy things like immersive storytelling. So if you've ever watched a TED Talk, then that's a prominent strategy that TED Talk speakers give, is they use personal narratives and just content that uses real people and realistic themes. So Generation Z prefers to be engaged on a personal level, and much like the adult learners that we were hearing about earlier, they like to see that their personal needs and interests are being reflected in the experiences that their professors are creating to engage them. So one of the things that you can do is to just talk to them to find out what are their personal needs and interests and preferences, and do things like audience surveys. Generation Z may be a little bit more passive than prior generations. They're described as being risk-averse, and they seem to have a preference for watching and observing online rather than being participatory in the world. And so that's something that might extend to the classroom as well, where they may be more reluctant to engage. And Gen Z does indicate a preference, I think, like many people do, to have the opportunity to observe a model, perform a task, or demonstrate a skill prior to attempting to do it themselves. And so in the classroom, you could be that model, or you could use videos to demonstrate what you want them to be doing. And then finally, Gen Z really sees the value in college. However, it's really important to them, having lived through the Great Recession, that they get their money's worth. They want to know what they're learning has applied practical value, they're skills oriented, but they also, as a cohort, they haven't really entered the workforce yet, and they actually have entered the workforce at lower levels than their comparable age peers from the millennial and Gen X generations had. And so they may not always make the connection themselves between what they're learning about in the classroom and how that has applied value to what they will be doing as part of their jobs in the real world. So sometimes you may have to make that connection explicit for them, maybe by creating more experiential activities where you're linking the research that you're talking about and the data that you're talking about in the classroom. Here's what we're reading, here's what we're researching, now go out in the real world and find examples of this. Could be one way to show them the value of their work. And then just finally, after I've said all this, the last slide that I have for you is some room for caution. So we want to make sure that we're avoiding generational reductionism or relying upon generational tropes. So just as one example, these students are digital natives, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are tech savvy. There's going to be a lot of individual variability here. Some of them will have expert knowledge and will know a lot more than we do. However, others are, their knowledge is limited to the apps that they use on the devices on which they use them. And that's why you might have very young students who come to you and they do not know where the power button is on a desktop computer, or they may try to swipe on your monitor screen. They don't know how to use a printer. They don't know how to use the Microsoft Office suite. And so that's something to keep in mind. And then this last point too, when I was reading to you about or explaining what the preferences were for Generation Z, you might have been thinking, well, these are the preferences for a lot of people. And I think it's important not to overestimate the differences that might exist between generations. And so a lot of the data that we have access to are not necessarily well-designed cross-sequential studies that allow us to control for things like their chronological age versus the effect of a cohort versus the time of measurement. And so just to give you a quick example of that, We know there's data that indicates that Generation Z has a preference for learning from videos, but that means compared to millennials prior, comparable age millennials and comparable age Gen Xers. And so that could be a true preference, or it could be the fact that Generation Z just has more access to slicker, cooler, more informative videos than the millennials and the Gen Xers did 15 and 30 years ago, respectively. So just be paying attention to that. And that's all I have for you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I am Maria de Jesus Dixon. My first name is Maria de Jesus. My last name is Dixon. And I am the Director of College Success Programs in the Academic Success and Career Center, where I also serve as an Assistant Director in the ASCC. And I'm here to talk about special populations that we have here on campus that you may or may not be aware of. So College Success Programs oversees 4 student populations. The first are Achiever Scholars, the second are Passport Scholars, the third is what we deem as Wish Scholars, which is a due population, and the last one are WSOS Scholars, and I'll get into what all of those mean in a sec. So Achiever Scholars are actually students that have been identified by the College Success Foundation, which resides on the west side of the state. They have an office there in Seattle, and they have another office in Washington, D.C., and their mission is to help first-gen low-income students have access to college. So at WSU, it began in 2010, 2011 is when we got our first cohort of students. And again, first-gen low-income. And this current year that we're in, academic year, we have 208 students at Pullman only. And system-wide, you can see the College Success Foundation has funded about 1,700 unique scholars in that system-wide, of which 781 have earned a bachelor's degree, so that's about a 46% completion rate. But I'm actually going to pause here because I wanted to poll the room just to kind of see where your experiences are. So how many in the room would consider themselves first generation? Okay. How many of yourselves would consider yourself coming from a low-income socioeconomic status? Okay. How many of you all, I'm originally from Texas, so I will always say y'all. San Antonio? Houston, okay. How many of y'all actually attended one high school? Okay. How many of y'all utilized financial aid? Okay. And how many of y'all are involved in CLASP, which is the Critical Literacy Achievement and Success Program here on campus? Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to go on to Passport Scholars. So Passport Scholars are actually students who are from the foster care system. We call them Passport Scholars because in 2007, 2008, the state legislature of Washington State passed a program called Passport to College Scholarship Program. So therefore, we deem them as Passport Scholars. They are identified on the admissions application and the FAFSA application. So on each application, there is a question that asks if they are currently or within the past year have been in the foster care system. And this is actually verified by the Washington Student Achievement Council, for those of you who may know what WASAC is. At WSU, it began in 2008 and 2009, where we had actually 2 scholars for that first cohort. And it includes students who are in the state foster care system, just the state of Washington, tribal foster care system, again within the state of Washington, and federal foster care. And so what federal foster care is, are unaccompanied refugee minors actually equates to federal foster care. So those students would actually come into a federal foster care system, again in the state. And then interstate compact, again, this is going to begin in 1920. And what interstate compact is would be a student who is in the foster care system in another state, but that state does not have room to place them, and they would move them to Washington State because Washington has room. So that is an interstate compact type of foster care. In our current academic year, system-wide, small population, we have 31 students. In Pullman alone, we have 23, so the Pullman campus has most of these students. Tidbit is that Washington State University is the one four-year institution that has the most passport scholars that attend WSU, which is I was surprised, and I'm not quite sure why. I've been in my position 9 months, and so it's kind of been various things that I've heard where students want to actually leave bigger cities and come to a smaller city, and they just want to kind of get away from the experiences that they were having. Is kind of the two things that I hear a lot from passport scholars. Wish Scholars is a new term that just was created as of December 31st, which is Washington Inspiring Students from Homelessness, and that is unique to WSU because that's a term that I came up with for these scholars. They, again, are identified on the admissions application and the FAFSA application. There is a question on those applications asking if a student is currently or within the previous 12 months have experienced homelessness. Again, it's verified by WASAC, the Washington Student Achievement Council. It will begin in fall of 2019. However, unofficially, again, based on FAFSA numbers for 18-19, system-wide, we've had about 96 students who have identified themselves as unaccompanied homeless or experienced homeless within the past 12 months. And in Pullman specifically, there are 76 students who have identified themselves on the FAFSA application. So WSOS Scholars stands for Washington State Opportunity Scholarship Scholars. This program is administered by Washington STEM, and it's a public-private partnership that began in 2011. So again, the state legislature put money in this big pot, and then they asked big STEM companies like Boeing and Microsoft to also put the same money or the same amount of money in this big pot so that they can provide scholarships to students wanting to pursue a STEM or healthcare degree, and they have to be either from low or middle income households. It started in 2011 at WSU. Currently, for this academic year, system-wide, we have about 580 scholars. Of that, 417 are specifically at the Pullman campus. So characteristics. So for achievers, they are more likely to be female, Black or African American or Latino students. They have various levels of academic preparedness. I have students who's just this in the fall. There was a number of them who got 4.0s, and then there was a number of them who had to be recessed. So their academic preparedness just varies. They will work part-time while attending college, and they do experience more difficulty navigating the bureaucracy of what is WSU. It's very interesting, a lot of the questions that I get from achievers. They do apply for financial aid, and their average gap that I have found is a $6,000 gap. I know Dr. Austin mentioned about $7,000 earlier, but I've been finding for achievers specifically, it's about $6,000. Again, they do receive Washington State Need Grant, the Pell Grant, the SELG Grant, College Bound if they signed College Bound, and if they did visit WSU, there's a $1,000 scholarship that's renewable. But that $6,000 gap is very real to a lot of these achievers. And we find that they do graduate in 5 to 6 years, so they don't do the traditional 4 years. Excuse me. For passport scholars, there are 400,000 in foster care nationally, and of that number, about a quarter of them are aged 14 through 20. And then if you bring that down to the state level, at any one time, there's about 8,800 children placed in out-of-home care for the state of Washington. A third of all foster care children age out, which means that they actually leave the foster care system when they hit adulthood. Adulthood, again, that is my Texas accent coming into play. 2 to 9% eventually earn a bachelor's degree, so it's a very, very low percentage of completion rate for these scholars. And they experience many well-documented challenges. They either are on public use assistance, they actually might have a background in substance abuse, they've been involved in the criminal justice system, At times, some of them may have risky sexual behavior, many mental health challenges, I don't want to say many, but mental health challenges in general, and sometimes even physical health challenges that they might have, and or early parenting, depending on their unique experiences. They are academically behind due to various transitions. So that question I asked of how many of y'all just attended one high school, a lot of these students attend anywhere from like 3 to 7 high schools within their freshman to senior year. And so as you can imagine, that puts them back academically. And I have on here that there's not a foster youth national database to say that we've been pushing, or I would say, administrators in higher ed have been pushing for a national database so that we can keep better numbers on this population. But as of yet, there still is not one. There's not even one in our state. I feel like we're starting to get there. The state of Washington is starting to get there with WASAC, the Washington Student Achievement Council. But as of yet, there's not a national one so that we can keep track of these students. So WISH scholars, I give you national numbers just because in 2015, Washington State newly established the Office of Homeless Youth Prevention and Protection. So that's 3 years ago, and so they still have not have come up with really, I don't want to say good numbers, but they haven't had the chance to really delve into this yet. But nationally, it's an estimated 500,000 to 2 million homeless youth a year, and that number, again, to me, it's a very wide. Just not disparity, but it's wide nonetheless. And it constitutes from these 3 different types of populations. So runaways, as you may know, are adolescents who leave home without parental consent. It also encompasses throwaway youth, which is a term where youth are actually pushed out of their homes for whatever reason. You know, there's been studies finding whether the youth are LGBTQ and the parents don't like that, or just for for the reason of where the parents feel that they just can't support the child, they push them out. So those are deemed throwaway youth. And then a doubly homeless stands for, or is defined as a group defined as adolescents who've been removed from their home by the state. So let's say they actually went into foster care system, but then those students actually ran away from that placement, ran away from those placements, and now they're homeless. So that number encompasses those 3 types of students. Let's see here. In Washington State, I did find that there's about 13,000 unaccompanied youth youth experience homelessness each year. And national demographics, again, because the office in the state was just created in 2015, I don't have state demographics. But nationally, there's about 57% Caucasian, 27% Black African American, and 3% American Indian or Alaskan Native. And they are at higher risk for anxiety disorders, depression, PTSD, and suicide attempts. I would also say I have found this as well within passport scholars. So engaging achiever and Washington State Opportunity Scholars. The reason I asked about class is because the students who come into the College Success programs, they partake in class in that program. I have to say it was a bit disappointing. There was only 2 of y'all that I saw in here. But as faculty and instructors, y'all are a key ally for their success here. And so if you are in class, I really encourage you to develop a relationship with these students. Even if you're not, if you find by some way, if the student self-identifies themselves somehow, some way in your office hours or in your class, that there is a relationship developed, because a lot of these scholars don't have anyone in their immediate network that has your expertise, or even someone who has a bachelor's, master's, or PhD degree. Understand that they are academically talented, but not academically savvy. So these students will study, but they don't know how to study well. Like, they'll take notes, but they don't know how to take notes well and how to go back to them and study from those notes for the exam. But they will put time in. I hear a bunch of stories of them staying up at night, putting study groups together of their cohorts. But again, they don't have that savviness yet. I do ask as well that you be patient with them when asking questions, as they are slow to respond. They'll just look around and they'll see if somebody else is going to answer. But they even know the answer, but are just shy to mention it. So one of the things that I do within our University 497 course, which is the first year focus course to help them, is I'll just have, it's taught by 2 graduate assistants, and I tell them, become comfortable in the silence and just wait for them to answer. And if you can also introduce and include culturally relevant material into classroom practices. Again, going back to their characteristics, a lot of them are Black and or Latino students. So if you can put those types of examples into your classroom material, that would go a long way. For Passport and Wish scholars, again, developing this relationship through class and not calling their status out in class. So what that means is I know that there are a lot of faculty and instructors who want to help this student population, but please, please, please do not say how many of you are from the foster care system in your class, right? Or how many of you all experience homelessness, because they're not gonna come forward to do that. But do let your students know that you are there to help them or that you can refer them to where they need to go. Relate learning outcomes to stability in their future. So one of the things that a lot of the Passport and Wish scholars experience is this anxiety of how their future is going to turn out, right? They have this really bad experience in childhood, high school. In college, they're finding out that they now are the drivers of the rest of their lives, that future. And so they need to understand, they need to know that what they're learning in the classroom is going to give them stability in the future, right? Not just the degree to get a job, like more than that. You have to tie that more to their personal well-being. If you could provide low-cost textbook options, that would be awesome. So again, going back to that $6,000 gap for for Achievers and WSOS, same happens with Passport and Wish scholars. And then if you can help them connect their determination and grit to their educational journey. There's a disconnect there. They don't see that same inner fortitude that they have that has helped them, whether they were homeless on the streets or whether they've been in 5 different foster care homes. They don't understand that determination and grit is the same determination and grit that can get them to completing their degree. They just don't see that. So you have to remind them of that. And I do a lot of that when they come in for advising appointments into my office, really connecting that to their journey here. And the one last thing that I did want to say is I'm not the only one on campus that works with these special populations. I would say I do a lot with the foster care and homelessness, but there are other programs that do a lot with first-gen low income, for instance, CAMP. There's Atlas. There are other secondary support systems as well, like LSAMP and so forth. And I just wanted to put that out there that I'm not kind of the end-all be-all. So, thanks.
Well, thank you to all of our presenters. I'm sorry, I'm not used to the actual microphone being really loud. I forgot to put a filler slide for questions. So this is the point where we can start asking panelists questions. We saw a lot of overarching things about making connections to the real world, right? So feel free to ask some questions directly to any of our panelists, or if you're not really sure who to direct it to, you can ask a more generic question. If you're on one of our distance or video conference sites, just unmute your microphone. If you are here in Pullman, I ask you to kind of wait patiently as I get over to you so we can use a microphone and everybody can hear us. So open for questions. We've got one here in the corner. Oh, sorry. We've got one here in the corner. I'm sorry if I kick you on the way, everybody.
Okay, well, one's I guess a comment and then a question. Can I do that? So first, I just wanted to say, for example, when you asked about CLASP, I just wanted to comment. I think I have a CLASP student, but I think there's so many different programs where I'm like, I don't know if it's CLASP or Atlas or Wish, or you know what I mean? So I don't know if that may have been some of the reason for the lack of hands. Just wonder. I know that was why I was like, I don't know. I certainly have a student that I meet with regularly, and I fill out forms and the weekly question and all that, and I'm like, but I don't know if that's CLASP or not. Is it?
It is CLASP. So CLASP.
There you go. I can raise my hand with confidence now.
It works with all of the special programs.
Oh, okay. Okay, but I don't know. That was just an observation. And then secondly, I think it had to do with the access accommodations. So what I struggle with, if there's any way. So I'm trying to balance when I've got a mass lecture class. So I've got probably over 400 students across 2 or 3 classes, but most of it's the mass lecture, Com 101, 350 in one classroom. Trying to balance access accommodations with then having to provide, I'll just be blunt, all students who just want the PowerPoints ahead of time and don't want to attend. You know what I mean? Like, so trying to balance that. It's like, yes, with this universal, we're great, but now I have students who are overwhelmingly not attending and then and using that as, I'm just going to get the PowerPoints, not attend class, not engage, so that I can memorize for the exam later, versus that accommodation. So tips for balancing that for especially mass lecture classes.
Do we have anybody who wants to take a shot at that one?
Thanks. So I have a similar issue with the Geology 101, which has 250 students in a classroom. What I decided to do was do attendance questions every time and make that worth enough points so that if they don't show up to class, all they can get is a C. So far, it's been working.
Okay, that's good.
I'll let you know at the end of the semester.
Got another comment or question or both?
Yeah, this is related. So I had in the fall students who be like, well, I have to go home for 2 weeks because I just can't handle it, so I have to go home. And then that was before Thanksgiving, and then they came back. Or I missed the exam a month ago because I have really bad anxiety, and so I just missed it. So I basically gave up on deadlines because people just wouldn't. I have no way to adjudicate their depression and anxiety and concussion, all this stuff. But it's a lot of them. It's a huge percentage of the class. So I feel like deadlines have disappeared. And I don't know exactly what to do with that either. So it's a related issue.
I'm the exact opposite. I'm like, when they get in the real world, they got to learn to live with deadlines. So I'm like a hardcore on my deadlines. I'm like, deadlines are deadlines. You get a job, you tell your boss, I felt anxiety, I didn't come to work for 2 weeks. Your boss can be like, well, you gave your job to someone else. So I'm super hardcore on deadlines. But to your point on class, I try to do stuff in class where there's value add in class that they can't get from just having the PowerPoints. So it's not just talking, it's like them working through problems, them doing things that the only way they're going to get to do that is to actually show up for class.
Thank you, Erica. And I love that because that really makes that connection to the real world that they'll see.
Having taught for 30 years here, I'll guarantee I'm seeing a dramatic shift in students. And I'm curious about the speaker from Vancouver, if you could comment on something that I have seen. Even more and more, it seems like. The long and short, I only teach at the 400, 500 level. And I handle about 5 or 6 different classes. And especially in the last 5 years, infamous Generation Z wants to make absolutely certain that PowerPoints are available or else blah, blah, blah. And they absolutely are almost to the point of demanding having PowerPoints from me. Being a traditionalist, I use overheads. I like them. But this new generation simply does not. And they seem to view their education through the mindset that it's information transfer. And that's as far as it goes. And I'm curious as to what the observations you may have regarding Generation Z.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And I haven't been teaching here for 30 years, and so haven't had the opportunity to kind of observe a shift like that. But I share this. I share your thoughts and feelings about the PowerPoint issue and the demanding of PowerPoint slides. And full disclosure, I don't give my PowerPoint slides to my students, and I've stopped hearing complaints about it by and large by providing them with explanatory rationales for why I don't give them my PowerPoint slides. And so I have on my Blackboard this nice little folder that is labeled lecture slides, and then if they go to that folder and click on it, then they'll see some videos from YouTube about how to take notes effectively, and then they will see some popular press media articles about why it is valuable to learn how to take your own notes, and then also I link those to the empirical primary source articles, where the research about note-taking and how to take effective notes, where those popular press write-ups come from, and then I encourage them to talk to me about it. And I also endeavor to make PowerPoint slides that are pretty much useless. So they are little bullet points and pictures or embedded videos, so that to try to help them along. I don't know what it is about Generation Z, or I don't know if it's part of the anxiety or the wanting to get down every word and maybe not knowing how to take notes effectively. It seems like note taking might be a lost art. It might be some of that anxiety about college is really expensive. I want to make sure that I write down every word, and so that might be part of what's interfering. It could be that part of, I'm an observer and I'm just listening to this. I'm not actively engaged and participating in it. I don't know the answer to that question, and I also don't know how different it is. If it's a cohort generational difference, or whether it's a time of measurement issue. So if because I actually feel like with our adult learners, actually, it is probably the people that I get a lot of pushback from wanting the PowerPoint slides relative to the younger students who seem more accepting when I do provide them an explanatory rationale. But I'm curious to hear other people's thoughts as well on that issue, and whether that's something that you all have observed in your classrooms too.
I think it is note-taking, to be honest, because I would have the expectation that my power voice doesn't work.
I don't really know.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think it is about note-taking, because I would expect seniors should have some working knowledge on how to take notes. Yet I look over people's papers, and my God, it's calligraphy 101. And it's well spelled out, and it's laid out, and it just perfectly aligns with what's on the screen. And I don't know.
I could say that a lot of I could say that a lot of international students ask for the slides ahead of time because they're worried about spelling. They don't really know how to do the abbreviations, or they're afraid that they'll abbreviate and then later have no idea what they were trying to abbreviate because it's not somewhere that they've had before. And so what they want the slides for is to have that the key ideas there, so that they can fill in the gaps and they feel more efficient with their time, instead of getting hung up on the numbers or the keywords, because a lot of PowerPoints are more like an outline extra. So I know that a lot of them have learned to ask for it. Whether it's actually helping, I don't really know for sure. Yeah.
Was someone in Vancouver trying to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to add, a lot of students, I give my very not incomplete slides to the students, because just to give them the general outline and graphs and things like that. And so I don't mind giving it to them, but we do activities in class, so they have to be there to get the points. But what I find interesting is this new group, these young students, now they even take their camera out and photograph the PowerPoint slides. Yes. They're trying to minimize they're just sitting there like observers in the classroom. It's just interesting.
This is Tri-Cities. This is Dr. Huff. I think it's worth noting in this debate about when students demand resources, what we're really critiquing is the education as product model, which is antithetical to a lot of us. But it's worth noting that's something that's actively sold to them by admissions and administration. And the students are sort of, well, I'll just say it's disingenuous at best to critique them for a model they've been sold for decades, and very hard sold, especially on students out of state, which are the real money makers.
I totally agree with you. I teach future teachers, and the biggest challenge I have is having them transition their thinking out of a typical undergraduate. So I made them do student-generated test questions so it could communicate to me what they seem as important. And man, they shot that vocab on almost every question. And I'm like, but, okay, so imagine yourself 10 years from now. You're alone in a classroom full of 30 first graders. Do you care about the name of that division problem? And they're like, no. So then why are you testing on it? And they're just like, well, like exactly what Tri-Cities had just mentioned. That is exactly what they've been trained to do, mimic back to you. Ooh, sorry, got really excited. Mimic back to you, open the brain, dump information. And I'm the same with my slides. I don't remember who had mentioned it, but I don't they're actually the ones making the decisions, and they're the ones that are making the final points. Mine's more of an application. It's not super basic, but yeah, I mean, they can take the PowerPoint slides, but they're not going to learn from it by itself.
And just to add to what Christy's saying too, one of the things that we discuss a lot over in AOI is the idea of giving student ownership over their education. So one of the things that we're seeing pop up, a technique that a lot of instructors are trying to adapt a lot more, is the idea of the flipped classroom, where you are giving them the information, but then they're responsible for it when they come into class, whereas they have to they have to become the instructors themselves within their coursework, and then giving them like an engaging activity to go along with the content, so then they have to actually apply what they've learned. And that helps too, because yes, they have the information, but are they actually able to apply it when it comes time? That can kind of be helpful as well. And I will agree, I mean, I'm like right between Gen Z and Millennial, but they did, all of our K-12 experience, it was set up to be just straight note-taking, and that's unfortunate, but that is kind of the model that we were presented with. And so that carries over, I think, into the higher ed as well. Christy? Anyone else? Oh, where?
I just wanted to, if somebody else has a question or comment, please go, because I've already spoken. I don't want to like monopolize. Okay. So I've incorporated the flipped classroom, or what I call a quasi-flipped classroom, just because there's 300 plus students sitting in the room, and so I do the best I can. My experience so far has been, one, I have to very much reiterate what a flipped classroom is. I have to have, and I've done this semester, I had to spend the first week and going over a custom lesson in Top Hat, for example, that I created, saying, what is a flipped classroom? What does it mean that the onus of learning is on you, and that the onus of providing the tools for that learning is on me? And so my experience so far so I do pop quizzes, we have in-class points, we have in-class discussions, so yes, the PowerPoints aren't the be-all and end-all, but they seem to all want them anyway, and that's fine, I provide them. So my earlier question had to do with just balancing this demand, and at the same time, then they are incensed that, they would have to read something that I don't then go over in class. I mean, I do, and I think that's not the purpose of lecture. I expand upon content, so I feel like we're in this catch-22, where it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. And if that's the norm, I'm okay with that. I would much rather go with the flipped classroom model. But as long as that's understood, amongst administration, people who are evaluating your teaching and things like that, that's fine. That's just that's what I've experienced so far. So it's just that balance, and I guess understanding that's where we're from. I've had students flat out tell me, I pay to be here, I should be able to do what I want.
Oh my God.
And right, I said, okay, good luck with that. And then, who's the monster and the meanie, it'll be me, and, that's okay.
I'm going to run over there to Phil over here. One of the things over at Academic Outreach and Innovation, we actually have weekly tips that go out, and you mentioned like half of them from this semester. One of them is ownership of learning and how to shift that more towards the student. And another one is getting their buy-in, right? So when you do I guess we can call it non-traditional things, how do we get them to accept that and take ownership?
Thank you. So let me ask a related question, because it seems like some of the presentations have created some conflict for me mentally. If I'm going to build value into my in-class time, that precious time where we're face-to-face, and incentivize students to come, how do I also accommodate students who have access center accommodations for processing speed, or students who have language challenges where the things I want to crank through to make my class valuable, I've got a very diverse student population with a set of diverse challenges. Let me throw it out there to you and ask how you strike that balance. Do you get started on an assignment that's due later? What strategies do you employ to deal with that in tension? Thank you.
I see you were. Phil, we have to wait, right? Be comfortable with the silence.
I feel like because Rochelle's gone, I'm doing twice the work, but I don't want to. I feel like sometimes the things that you can do to support international students in this way all happen in that first week of class. Like, don't hand out a mystery syllabus that has no information about like when things might be due. I mean, even if you're not sure of the due date because you need to kind of move through the material and see if they've really grasped it, and then maybe it might be week 5 or 6, giving them that kind of clue might help them to feel like they can pace the work building up to something like a paper or a presentation or something like that. And then also reiterating things that you might assume are common knowledge for your students but don't really feel like that to them. Like week 1, I always say, remember, you have your phone, you can record what I say in class. And then just having said that aloud, they feel much more comfortable. Oh, okay. Ooh, maybe they've never even thought about doing that, but maybe they never even listen to it later. But just that like crutch makes them feel more confident. Things like that can go a long way. And sharing notes after the fact, maybe not the PowerPoint before the class, but after the class, if that feels like something that you feel like would be more supportive, but would still incentivize them to come and hear you talk about it. But then that way later, if they feel like, oh, but I just don't know what that word was, it was pretty quick, or it was really long, or I don't think I spelled it right, and I can't find it in Google, so I must not have spelled it right. If they have the PowerPoint afterward, they feel like they can fill in the gaps. Small things like that can go a long way. It doesn't have to be like a complete restructuring of what you're doing. Yeah. But does anybody else have any other tips? Yeah. Who? Oh, Wendy. Hi.
Hi, whoa, this is loud. I'm Wendy Steele. I'm the assistive or the accessible technology manager. And one of the things that we've incorporated with working with the Access Center is ahead of time, the flipped classroom sometimes helps with students processing so that they can review that material beforehand, and so it's not a surprise. That helps, as well as using Panopto and recording your lectures, allowing students to go back. They can take their own notes at their own pace. That helps as well. And I know it doesn't apply to all classes, but it can really help. So those are just some of the ideas.
You'll take another stab?
Believe it or not, there's 2 people in the room who have had or do currently serve on catalog subcommittee. Sarah over here serves. I served for 9 years, and I will absolutely guarantee you the comment made on syllabi is dead on. The tighter your syllabus is, the better it's going to be for the students. And I can't tell you the number of times we've seen uniqueness in terms of due dates, or, well, maybe we'll have a paper, but maybe we won't. And the instructor, of course, always reserves the right to make any changes he or she wants to a syllabus after the class starts. No, you don't. End of the argument. The syllabus that you pass out, that's the one that people are going to use. And that's the one that you really need to, if you can tighten it up in any way, shape, or form, access information, all those kind of things, very important.
Thank you. And I wanted to also mention, several people mentioned low-cost resources. And so academic outreach and innovation will definitely help with OERs. But I was also told about a cool new initiative. As you can tell, I'm looking at my IM that my boss, Rebecca, gave me a shout out to. So there's going to be a request for proposals from the provosts, and maybe Erica can speak to this one in more detail, for WSU faculty who want to convert their courses to free digital materials. So that should be available by the end of the month. And again, academic outreach and the libraries are going to support. So that might be a really great initiative. I've seen the faculty that have done this have been very, very pleased with those results. Any questions, especially from video conference? Y'all been quiet for a while. Your microphone's not as cool as ours.
I just have a comment and then I have a question. I'm not sure if Jessica mentioned this or not, but to the point that y'all were talking about earlier about the PowerPoint slides. So millennials and Gen Z were under No Child Left Behind. And as a parent who children went through the public school system in Wisconsin, they had, what would it be? They actually put committees together that had parents and K-12 administrators and teachers on it that went through all of the requirements that schools had to do for No Child Left Behind. And for 10 years, I saw this system only teach to that test, right? Only to make the grades and what they needed to make so that they wouldn't become a school identified for improvement or a school district identified for improvement, right? Because of the stigma and or lack of our money that would be taken away from the district. So I would say to keep that in mind because all three of my children are also, they want PowerPoint notes as well. I've noticed that when they were going, when our older boys were going into college. And I really sat and thought about it and thought, this is how they were learning in that K-12 system. So that's one comment. The second comment would be to say, if you can remind the students that with also giving them tools, you're helping them to think critically about things, right? Not just to regurgitate the things that are in the book or that are in your PowerPoint slides. And again, they aren't making that connection. So I would just encourage if y'all can do that. And to this instructor gentleman in front of me that said, I don't do the PowerPoints, I do the flip thingies. Sorry, overheads. I guess I would want to push you out of your comfort zone and ask, what is it about the PowerPoint slides that seemed to me got you pretty passionate? A reaction as to why you will not consider it. If I guess in my mind I see us as being an institution of higher ed, the student being our customer and us giving them that service, and that they're asking for that. What would be your hesitation? And I just ask that to try to understand your point of view.
A debate. From my perspective, I do PowerPoints professionally, and they take a tremendous amount of time and effort to be able to have things appear, disappear, all those kind of things. That's number one. Number two, I actually use a document camera. And I actually have lecture notes that go along with all my lectures. So all the names are spelled out, all the complicated formula are spelled out, structures are all there. One of the things that's nice about a document camera, it allows me flexibility that if I'm looking at the audience and I'm seeing some eyes roll, I can take out pieces of paper instantly and say, let's go at this a different way. So let's backtrack. The one thing about PowerPoint is you're kind of locked in to the lecture as to how it flows. That's why I like the overheads, is that it gives me flexibility depending upon how I'm sensing the class understanding very complicated procedures. Again, I do teach at 400, 500, so some of that stuff gets to be a little hairy.
I like the alternative option.
Yeah, thank you. So please, I just want to add something. Like we've been talking about learning preferences, and I work with international students. Myself, I was an international student. So with the features and characteristics of the new students, I'm going to say we because I'm including myself. We might have different learning, like learning styles, which are different, and I have noticed that with my students. So we might come like we have to take into account that there's might be a technology divide gap. So the international students some of them don't really like PowerPoint, even though I do it to my students, but I usually ask them to give me feedback through technology. But like Chinese students would love that you go and ask them if they really need some help, because they are shy to ask, but if you take them and ask them to come to their office, they would love to do it. So it's just I wanted to add about international students. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
The lady who just spoke probably can speak better to this than myself, but providing an outline as well as the vocabulary words ahead of time can also help students, international students, as well as those with comprehension, so they don't get stuck on the word or they think they're hearing it differently than they're actually seeing it. So being able to see those words ahead of time can really be helpful, or have that outline so they can follow that and know how long the presentation is going to be, as well as anticipate what's coming next. So then they're not worried like, oh goodness, now I'm behind. They can kind of keep up that way as well as using videos that have captions or a transcript. Not only help those that need it, but help everyone. So those are some other options.
I'm going to ask Wendy a quick question here before we jump to these two ladies at the table. So one of the things we talked about, and I know Rochelle's already gone, I think she was the one that mentioned it, was universal learning. So can you tell us about universal learning and how it would apply to every single one of our panelists and everybody, whether they are in the Access Center, they should be with the Access Center, or otherwise?
This is a quick synopsis. It's universal design for learning. So it's providing options for students. And so it's allowing students to be able to learn in the way that they might have a strength in. So instead of just providing one option, you can only read and learn this concept by reading it. You can also show them a lecture, or they can watch a video about it, or they can interact with some type of puzzle game. So it allows them all these different options. And I know that sounds overwhelming, like, oh my goodness. But a lot of you are already doing it. You have a lecture, you provide an outline, you provide a summary of what you're talking about, or you're showing a diagram, and instead of just showing the diagram and say, I hope you figure it out, and in some cases that's what you want, but you want to be able to provide them that choice, as well as providing more engagement, so having a video or using their phone that helps with their strengths, as well as allowing them to show their understanding in a variety of different ways. So instead of saying, and again, it depends on the course, but if you are teaching a literacy course and it's a novel and you want to have them show the connections between the different characters, instead of having them write about it, maybe they can do a diagram or do a video or a presentation to show that knowledge. So,
thank you. I had these two ladies, two hands over here, and then I think a few others.
My question is taking us in a little bit of a different direction. I had a question for the speaker in Vancouver. Can you remind me your name? Do we still have Vancouver?
Yes, I'm Jess.
Oh, thank you. I'm also a fellow millennial, so hi. My question's in regard to what the literature might suggest Generation Z has in regard to performance on self-efficacy, motivation, or their thoughts and feelings on that, and how evidence-based research to help us understand how we might support them in those capacities.
To be honest, I don't know that there is a literature yet, at least on things like self-efficacy and motivation for Generation Z at the college level. And just as a point of fact, when I was searching for this presentation, and I went to Eric and PsycInfo and typed in Generation Z and trying to find articles with Generation Z in the title or in the abstract, only 20 popped up across the two databases, and of those 20, only about 15 were relevant. So I think that those data are out there, but they are not labeled as being focused on Generation Z per se. And so I can't answer your questions specifically about Generation Z as a cohort and compare them to like the millennials or like Gen Xers on things like self-efficacy and motivation. I can talk a little bit about the marketing data that this group is supposed to be very self-reliant, very self-motivated, and to really value learning. But that's about all I can say about what the data say about them. And I think just the general principles about what helps motivate people to learn, if you're thinking from a theoretical perspective, there's no reason why those same general principles shouldn't also apply to Generation Z.
Cool, that makes sense. Thank you.
I just had a quick thought. I was waiting to see if anybody brought up on that, the whole PowerPoint outline thing. One of the things that I do is I do give my students my PowerPoint, but it's an outline, and then I use a tablet and I annotate as I'm doing class. So students have to come to class and they have to take notes, and then we're doing activities as well. But if you can get a tablet, it's an easy way to give them a PowerPoint. They have that structure that makes them feel more comfortable, but there's a bunch more that's going to get added, and they pretty quickly figure that out.
Thank you, and I'll give a shout out to the Spark because we actually have touchscreen tablets and screens in here too.
Can you talk about what the Access Center does to help students transition to the workforce, and what kind of studies are being done about how those students do when they go out in the work world 10 years down the road or 5 years?
So I'm not technically with the Access Center, so I think that's a great question, and I will pass that on to Rochelle, and hopefully she can let everyone else know. So
I saw several hands.
I just had a question, and I don't know, this is maybe a two-part question, but the first is, everybody that created this today, thank you. It's really helpful to get like kind of the different perspectives. But was there a reason for maybe why the Campus Counseling Center was not part of the panel?
I wasn't.
Christy?
Hi,
Christy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I was about to call you out.
Okay, so this is Rebecca Vandeboord, and a group of us kind of came up with the panel. And in fact, I met with and talked with Ellen Taylor, and I think Ellen is in the audience. And I think we just didn't want to put the focus there. Okay, we just didn't want to put the focus there, but knew that there might be some questions about the increasing incidence of mental health issues, and so had hoped that there would be someone in the audience to help address that. But part of it was just selecting. I mean, there's a number of topics we could be talking about when we talk about today's students in the classroom, and sort of selecting what those would be for this panel. And I had IM'd Christy, but while I have your attention, I'd be interested to know if people are interested in continuing this conversation and what that might look like, whether it would be brown bags or a book club or some more faculty-led workshops, so it would be great to get some input on that. Thanks. Thank you all for attending.
I've been walking around the room and I'm not near my laptop, sorry. So anybody have any suggestions? And that's from our video conference sites as well. Would that be something y'all be interested in? I'm getting blank stares. Yeah, people are excited. They're excited, Rebecca. You should see their faces.
Yeah. I think it could be really helpful, whether it's, I don't know exactly what the solution might be, but certainly an ongoing conversation, because I work in the College of Veterinary Medicine, and so this is a conversation that we've had over the last several weeks. I did actually a presentation on Gen Z and some mental health issues that we're seeing. Right. So I'm the counselor and faculty member there, and so we are having this conversation as well in our college, and a lot of people are there's a lot of buzz around it, and so whether it's workshops, it doesn't matter to me, but I think it's necessary because we will be having an influx of this generation for the next decade or so. And so I think coming up with solutions, I love that people are asking like PowerPoints versus overheads, and the designs of our classrooms are very different too, whether we're speaking to 300 students versus maybe like a smaller lab, or so it's all very different in the way that we teach and the student populations that we have and how to accommodate. I think the more minds, the better, to be honest. I think that we can all come up with some really creative solutions. I certainly have ideas just from kind of a mental health perspective, and, encompassing diversity and disabilities, or, differing abilities. Those kinds of things I think could be helpful to just kind of discuss at a larger scale.
I can't see this, whoever was just speaking. Can you tell me who that was?
Bethany Colaprete.
Okay, so maybe we could be in touch. Also, I believe Erica's still there. Is that correct?
She is.
Okay, so Erica's focus really is on student success in the provost's office, and so many of the things she presented at the beginning are solutions that we're working on, and so maybe we can bring a smaller group together, Erica, with the speaker who just spoke and maybe the panelists, and have some brainstorming.
Great. I'll make sure to get her information. And Erica is nodding in complete agreement.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
All right. We have another comment or question. Question. I think this is my workout for the day. Right?
Okay. So my question is, the students that need extra accommodation, either longer time to take a test or anything else, how do they get it? I mean, do we just say, okay, sure, can I have another half hour? Or do we say we need to see documentation, and how do they get it? I've had students that I think should have official documentation because they look to me like they're on the autism spectrum, or they're so nervous they would rather take a 0 than do a presentation, literally. We also have, international students who probably could do better with extra time on a test that requires reading and writing. I don't know, what do they do? Literally, I have no idea. Are there actual guidelines at WSU that we should follow that are in place?
Oh, look, I'm going to go over to Erica.
Thank you. Since our Access Center representative had to leave early, I'll just mention that that's what the Access Center's for. And the 8 billion things you have to include on the syllabus about policies, one of them is about the Access Center. And it states that students are supposed to go there to get whatever the authorization is, and that's supposed to then come back to you. And that's how it's supposed to work. So if that's not working, it's good for us to hear about it so that we can try to make it work better.
I'm going to come over to you in just a second.
That's kind of a follow-up to that. I'm familiar with all the access accommodations and whatnot, but I've had many international students who I know will do much better if they have at least another half an hour, and I've unofficially given them more time, but then you kind of get into that realm of, is this fair to all the other students in class that I'm allowing these students to have extra time? But I also want them to succeed. Does anyone have recommendations? I mean, I don't know, what the official policy is in that kind of arena.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah,
I know looking at timing for a test or timing for things, setting a time that's somewhere in between, that I know that my students who totally know the concepts and really get it down can get it done in this amount of time anyway. And so making the time long enough that somebody who doesn't speak English as their first language can still have a reasonable amount of time to complete it. So I've tried to do things that way. But as far as accessibility, about addressing Sharon's question, that when students come to me, I am absolutely empathetic. I want to work with you on this. I copy and paste from my syllabus because usually they're asking via email. Here's what. Here's the phone number, here's the this and that, let's get this conversation going, and I'm happy to work with you, but I turn it 100% over to the Access Center because I just don't feel like it's my expertise to be able to say that your anxiety, is your anxiety bad enough that I can make accommodation for you, but oh wait, you came to me and you're stressed out, or you came to me and you have a concussion, or I don't feel like I have I'm not a doctor. Well, I'm not that kind of doctor. So, I try to make sure that they know that there's support out there, but I want to work with you is really the bottom line that I tell them, but I completely turn it over to the Access Center. And usually the Access Center is pretty fast. It's shocking to me sometimes how quick they are in processing through stuff and how quickly they get things to you. And then as soon as I get something, I try to give it back to them in as responsive amount of time as I can, that I will go through and make the changes that they've requested and do it all on Blackboard or whatever that looks like. So I think trying to find a way to be respectful to students while still being true to what the university wants us to do in the first place. Did I address that?
Thank you, Jenny. There you go.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I don't know the exact requirements either for each accommodation that's in place, but I do the same thing where I tell the students I'm happy to work with them. I have official statements about the Access Center in the syllabus, including their physical location, their phone number, their email address, their website, all of that stuff. But I tell the students it's up to you to take advantage of the system that's in place. I'm not going to work with individual students on how much extra time they should get, if they need exams in larger font, that sort of thing. But that I'm happy to work with whatever accommodations are officially approved by the university. And I've had a lot of students, I've got a lot of good feedback from students who had not considered the Access Center before, that they felt a huge amount of relief taking advantage of those services. Even just setting up an appointment was relieving for them. They don't necessarily take advantage of all of the accommodations that might be approved for them, but having that in place officially makes them feel better. And there's also some comfort I've heard that those documents and the accommodations continue for the students' whole time here. I don't know how often they have to renew or update a diagnosis or anything, but that those accommodations remain on file, and it's not necessarily a process the students have to go through every semester fresh with each new professor. Everything is handled again by the Access Center. Because a lot of us have a lot of students, and it's when you've got 400 students, 500 students, it's a lot to ask to customize your course for each individual student's strengths and weaknesses. So I like to refer the students to the Access Center, same as what you said. And I've only heard good things about students' experiences there, whether they have a long-term thing that's been impacting them in a lot of areas, like anxiety, or whether they have a concussion or some, maybe they broke a leg or something. The Access Center is a great place to refer them to.
Thank you. And before I hand off the microphone, I want to respect people's time because we have about 3 minutes. So I'm going to hand it to y'all in just a second. But just in case y'all have to skedaddle out of here, I want to thank everybody for attending morning and or afternoon. And thank you so much to our panelists that came. Erica for coming all the way over here from the provost. We really, really appreciate it. This kind of conversation is really beneficial for all of us. And I'm hoping that Rebecca and Bethany, I was right, I was afraid. And then Erica can kind of continue that conversation. On the screen for people that are video conference attendants, that's the open educational resources. Academic Outreach and Innovation has a lot of different things for y'all to take advantage of, faculty-led workshops, trainings. So I think we ran out of some of the flyers because they seem to be popular, just kind of sprinkled throughout here. Let us know if you need anything. But we'll be here for a little while to continue the conversation if you'd like.